My next guest is Dr. Todd Whitaker. He is recognized as a leading presenter in the field of education with a message about the importance of teaching that has resonated with hundreds of thousands of educators around the world. Todd is a professor of educational leadership at the University of Missouri and professor emeritus at Indiana State University. He has spent his life pursuing his love of education by researching and studying effective teachers and principals. Prior to moving into higher education, he was a math teacher and basketball coach in Missouri. Todd then served as a principal at the middle school, junior high, and high school levels. He was also a middle school coordinator in charge of staffing, curriculum, and technology for the opening of new middle schools. Todd has written over 50 books, including the national bestseller, What Great Teachers Do Differently. Other titles include Dealing with Difficult Teachers, 10-Minute Inservice, Your First Year, What Great Principals Do Differently, Motivating and Inspiring Teachers, and Dealing with Difficult Parents. My personal favorites are Essential Truths for Principals, co-authored with Danny Steele, and School Culture Recharged, which he co-authored with Steve Grunnert. Todd is married to Beth, also a faculty member of educational leadership at the University of Missouri and professor emeritus at Indiana State University. They are parents of 3 children, Catherine, Madeline, and Harrison. Welcome to the podcast, Todd.
Well, thank you, Dana. I'm honored to be here. It's a treat for me.
Well, thanks so much for wanting to talk to me today. I really, especially am going to point out things that spoke to me in the book School Culture Recharged. But we always start out talking about a story of when my guests were in the trenches and when they managed to crawl out. So please share a story that resonates with you.
Okay. What's strange is I still feel like I'm in the trenches. You know, I feel like I'm different than other presenters because other presenters see their peer group as other presenters. And I see my peer group as principals and teachers. It's just a different way to look at it. And so I've always felt like that. That's who I hope I resonate with, and that's who I most connect with, and that's who I want as my peer group, the people that are making a difference every day. But anyhow, I'm thinking back, my very first year, I was a math teacher and basketball coach in a tiny town called Keytesville, Missouri. I always say it's a suburb of Brunswick, which is a joke in Brunswick.
Okay.
And anyhow, my very first year, I had a student named Curtis, and Curtis had a gift that I truly wish I could have. Curtis had the ability to sleep 45 minutes out of every 50 minutes of his life. And our class periods coincidentally were 45 minutes. So Curtis would come into a class, get snuggled in and just all comfortable on his backpack, be sound asleep for 45 minutes. 2 minutes before the bell rings, he'd wake up, zip up his bag, and he'd go on to the next class. It's interesting because I know I talked to other teachers about it and they were happy he was sleeping. They felt like that was easier for them if he was sleeping. But I felt like it was a reflection on me that he was sleeping in my class. And I guess I felt like it was a reflection on me because it was a reflection on me. And I thought, what can I do? Well, there's no reason to hammer Curtis. If you knew him, he's been hammered his whole life. There's no reason to yell at him. He's been yelled at his whole life. No punishment's going to do anything. He can take it like nothing you've ever seen. And I thought, how can I get him engaged? Because that's my obligation as a teacher. It's, you know, I always say, you ever notice how ineffective teachers have more confidence than good teachers? Because ineffective teachers can go ahead and teach even when none of the kids are paying attention. And the good teachers need all the kids paying attention. And when they're not, the good teachers think it's up to them. And so anyhow, I thought, what can I do? Well, I'd been teaching maybe 3 weeks and Curtis came in and I thought, I went to Curtis and I took a seating chart. Used to have him on a piece of paper, a seating chart. And I go, Curtis, I'm not very good at this teaching thing. I'm brand new. I don't know what I'm doing. And I was wondering if you could do me a favor because I'm afraid I call on the left side of the room more than the right side of the room. So I'm going to give you this seating chart. And I just wonder if you could put marks by anybody's name I call on. And then at the end of the day, we could see, did I call on the left side or the right side more? And how did that work out? And Curtis said, fine, I'll do it. Anyhow, at the end of the day, I go to Curtis and I go, what did I call on, left side or right side more? Well, Curtis, of course, had fallen asleep and the seating chart actually had a pile of spittle.
Oh, wow.
It had come out and formulated on the seating chart. And interestingly, your first reaction could be punishment, consequence, give up. But Curtis had been punished and had consequences and been given up on his whole life. So I know that's not the solution. I always say if yelling at kids worked, I'd yell at kids all the time, but it doesn't. And if being negative worked, I'd be negative all the time, but it doesn't. And so the next day I came in and I go, Curtis, I'm concerned I call on girls more than boys, or boys more than girls. I don't remember what I said. And could you put marks by their names? Then the next day I go, Curtis, I'm worried that I call on kids that raise their hand more than kids that don't. So when you put a mark by their name, if you could put an N or a V, an N, if I called on them and their hand wasn't up, that meant they were a non-volunteer. A V, if their hand's up and they're a volunteer.
Uh-huh.
And I start doing this, keep doing this every day. And eventually Curtis starts making marks.
Okay.
And one day I knew I had him because Curtis came up to me and goes, Mr. Whitaker, when I answer questions, should I put marks by my name? And then what Curtis started doing, he started doing percentages and fractions. Wow. We divided the seating chart into a quadrant and ratios, and that's when I had him. And that was really it. It's thinking through. I always say you don't have to be quicker than your students, you just have to be smarter than your students. You know, you don't have to out-quick them, you have to out-think them. And it's just thinking, what is it that Curtis may not have been approached, and am I willing to stick with it? Because if we're talking about culture, you know, if you give up, you never alter culture. And so was one of the good fortunes I had. And Curtis and I are good buddies on Facebook, and he's been able to carve out a niche for himself. And so I'm very, very honored for that. But I'm sure I probably got this from another teacher, probably one of your listeners, but it's that idea of what can I do to pull him in versus trying to hammer him.
Yeah, that really shows resilience in the fact that, you know, it took a little while. It took different types of tries, but finally he caught on, right? And the fact that he was doing math by making these check marks on the paper. So it's interesting in how, you know, sometimes we need to think out of the box, right? And how we can get students engaged, especially a student like him who was using your class time to fall asleep and who many other teachers had probably given up on. So yeah, that's really inspiring to hear. Tell me a little bit about your journey from school and district leadership into higher ed and what the transition was like. Was it fairly easy, or were there challenges along the way?
I'm trying to think of even how to answer that question. I do need to know the people that are actually watching this. I need you to make note that the camera adds 10 pounds and we got like 9 cameras on me. So if you could keep that in mind, that'd be helpful. For the people listening on the podcast, that's no benefit, but I also will let them know I'm business on top but party on the bottom. So that in and of itself, they'll not have that out of their mind by the time this session's done. It's really funny. I was a business major and got in law school. And I realized, and this sounds really, and I'm not demeaning any profession, but I realized I didn't want lawyers as my peer group. And some people care about legal and illegal, and I care about right and wrong. And unfortunately, those don't have 100% correlation. And I happened to be dating a girl whose dad was a high school basketball coach. And her mom was also in education, and I thought, that's what I want to do. So I quit law school and I got into education, and I took a teaching position, teaching math and coaching, because I wanted to make a difference. That's just what I wanted to do. And I was very blessed. I was an average teacher, but I stumbled my way through it. And I thought, is there a way to have more influence? And so I wanted to become a principal. And then is there a way to have more influence? So I went to central office and opened up 2 middle schools and became principal of one of them. And then I realized, you know what I'd really like to do is teach people how to be principals, because I hadn't realized that I thought all teachers were similar. And my very first year as a teacher, I realized the difference between the best teacher in the school and the worst teacher in a school is a cavern, not a sliver. But they all want to be good, and somebody just needs to teach them how. And then I became a principal, and I thought I thought everybody does it the same. And then I realized they don't. And, you know, for example, great principals have faculty meetings teachers look forward to and value, and other principals either don't have faculty meetings or people don't look forward to and value them. But it's because they don't know how. And the biggest disadvantage a principal has is that they've never worked with a great principal, because now you have to figure it out on your own. And I thought, how can I have more of an opportunity to influence people, hopefully in a positive way, as higher ed? And I was also blessed. My wife and I both had visitors to our schools when we were principals, literally on a daily basis from all over the world. And then they'd want us to come and work with their school. Our superintendent was so supportive. He'd let us do this, but I just felt too guilty being away from the school. And I thought I'd like to work with more schools. I'd like to expand my influence. So then I took a position at Indiana State University, where I worked for years. And now I'm at University of Missouri in the principal superintendent preparation program.
Okay, so yeah, just kind of transitioning through the ranks and realizing, you know, how you can make the influence on people who are aspiring to be principals. And, you know, seeing, as you said, a lot of these principals come into positions And let's say, what I think is interesting, you can kind of compare that to the teacher prep program, but also the principal licensure program. You know, they don't teach you necessarily when you're actually in the trenches, right? They don't tell you about, you know, these type of situations, and if you come into this type of school, right? And how that would look.
Interestingly, I think the good people do,
Mm-hmm.
but I also think, Dana, it doesn't resonate unless you need it.
Yeah, yeah.
For me to talk about classroom management when you're 19, I believe I'm teaching you exactly what to do and exactly the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what's really strange? It really matters when you're 22 and you have your own class.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's both. It obviously could be ineffective people can't teach you how to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't learn how to be great from average people because average people don't know how to be great. They're not keeping it a secret. They don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think it really is two things. And the other thing is, and this is why I like doing what I do and work with schools and have the opportunity to interact so much, is when you need something, it's sort of like when a school district hires a new teacher. I always think it's so weird on the days before school starts, they spend half a day on insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And the new teacher needs, what do I do the very first day of school? What do I do when these kids show up? And it's just that time. And that's when they want it more than they ever wanted it when they were in college.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just think it's a, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And think about the difference in any program, whether it's elementary, middle school, high school, or college. Wasn't the difference between the person you learn the most from and the person you learn the least from quite a difference?
Yeah, no, I get that totally. And
right. So I tend to not generalize about teachers or professors or principals or students, because I think
yeah, no, I get how, you know, a lot of the things that you remember, especially are from those professors that, you know, show examples from their leadership of what really stood out when they were a principal or a superintendent, thinking back to my principal licensure program. So I want to shift and talk a little bit about your book, School Culture Recharged. The first thing I wanted to point out is you talk about how school culture changes first by changing the measure of trust between adults in the building. And you wrote about how educators should be vulnerable to their peers' expertise. How have educators progressed in your observations in the past 3 to 5 years in stepping outside their comfort zone and listening to peers instead of just being on their own island?
that's a pretty tough generalization, how have people progressed in educators around the world in 3 to 5 years, but I'll give this a shot. Mm-hmm. There's two things. One thing that sounds strange, I truly don't believe people that are effective are different. Mm-hmm. You know, the best teacher you had 30 years ago, would they be really bad now, Dana? They'd be really good, wouldn't they? Mm-hmm. Because there's something about them.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a book called How to Get All Teachers to Be Like the Best Teachers, because that's the only solution I can think of to education. In every school in the world, at least one teacher's cracked the Da Vinci Code. Mm-hmm. And we don't need something new. We need to replicate what it is we have. Mm-hmm. But I think the leader, there's a couple of things. One thing is, and it's funny, I just saw this on Twitter last night, and that's one of the ways I was going to suggest that we become more open, vulnerable, and learn from each other. So on Twitter last night, somebody quoted the book, What Great Principals Do Differently. And I've never read any of my books, so I don't even know what's in them, which has probably been a blessing for me. But and they said, a principal who makes themselves vulnerable actually is stronger, not weaker. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that same way with a teacher. It's funny, one of the things I wrote in one of my books on culture, if you want to change the culture of a school, especially a middle school or a high school, I'm just thinking of the male percentages. Mm-hmm. The number one thing you need is you need a disclosing male who's respected by the other males. Mm-hmm. And disclosing just means some level of vulnerability. Either, you know, something I found that worked with Kevin, I'm really having trouble with Mark. Anybody have any suggestions? Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any ideas of the best way to teach this? Once a male that associates with the other males, it's okay if they associate with females, but they're not going to influence the other males. Mm-hmm. A male that's respected by the other males, the entire group of males will immediately fall in line if you get one male to disclose. That's that same way with a leader. I think the other thing about trust is this, and I have a graph in one of my books, and I don't mention books to sell books. I mention books in case you actually want to go see them. You can get one, buy it at Amazon, Xerox it, send it back, and I don't care. Just don't tell the publisher I said that. What's interesting, I have a little chart that talks about the higher the level of trust, the larger the zone of indifference. And zone of indifference doesn't mean you don't care. Zone of indifference means you're not nickel and dime to death. And if I have a leader I trust, then I'm not questioning every decision they make. You know, if you have a child and your child has a teacher you really trust, and your child comes home and says they have homework in this teacher's class, you say, do it, get started, get to work, go do it, go ahead, get started, no matter what the homework is, because you trust the teacher. If your child has homework in a teacher's class they do not trust, and they come home, you go, let me see it. How many points is this worth? How's this going to be graded? Is this a punishment? Where'd the teacher to get their degree? Do they have a degree? You know, what's your grade? And there isn't that trust. And that same thing in a leader. Once I establish trust and people start to trust and value each other, then we open ourselves up to learn from each other. And social media is probably one of the ways, and I'm not talking about political and opinionated, just educators sharing on social media. What happens is the knowledge of one becomes the knowledge of all. And now I don't have to work with an outstanding fourth grade teacher. All I have to do is find an outstanding fourth grade teacher to learn from. And that's something that Twitter, and all the other social media options. Twitter is just dominated by educators now. That's one of the social media options that allows that potential growth, where we don't even have to seem vulnerable, because I don't have to even interact with the person. I can just lurk and learn from them and steal ideas. So I think there's been more opportunities, which hopefully more people have taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I think that's just a growing number of educators that, especially these new educators that are recently graduated, getting onto Twitter and finding their PLN and you know, people that they can learn from. And I've been on for about 3.5 years, and I've definitely learned a lot from other educators and connected with a lot of people to have on the podcast through Twitter. So my next question about school culture recharged, because you write about the culture of the school will cause teachers to go into defense mode. How would you advise a leader who is coming into a building that has high levels of toxic stress amongst staff?
Okay, that's a great question. And it's funny now, because right now we're in the pandemic, and I'm doing a lot on leadership during difficult times, leadership during crisis. And the thing that's really strange, it's exactly the same as leadership should be anyhow. It's just you're more exposed.
Yeah.
If you go into a school that's in crisis, so there's a lot of conflict, what happens is you have to be good or you don't have a chance. But the same skills are needed there than they would in a good school. It's sort of like if you have a teacher that's in a high socioeconomic population, they can be pretty weak and they get along okay. The kids behave, the kids tolerate their worksheets, they're happy to work in rows, or they're willing to, they don't push back. If you take that teacher and put them into a low socioeconomic school, they are exposed in 10 seconds, but they weren't effective in the other school. They just had an easier setting where their weaknesses weren't exposed. So I think that's the vulnerability in going into a high-risk school. But I think it's exactly the same thing. You know, it's really funny. I've been in principal preparation programs for years, and people get a job and they say, Todd, they wanted a male and I'm a female. You know, I'm the new principal. They wanted a male, I'm a female. They wanted a female, I'm a male. They wanted an internal person, I'm an external person. They wanted somebody younger and I'm older. They want someone older and I'm younger. And I say, all that matters till the first kid's sent to the office. And if the teachers see you as supportive of them, that's your shot. And if they don't, it doesn't matter. It's kind of like, you know, you would ask about an introduction and what did I say when I sent you an introduction? I don't care what you say. Nobody cares about the preview. They only want to see the movie. And it doesn't matter what your background is. It matters if you're good. And that's really it. None of the other stuff matters. I work with principals all the time that are hiring assistant principals. And now one of the big trends in education is to have a committee to hire an assistant principal. We put a couple teachers on there and a parent and a student and a school board, whoever it is, we do, different schools do different things. And I go, you know what? You only should do that if it gets you a better candidate. It's not going to give you any credibility. It's not going to matter. The credibility lasts until the person starts. But if I hire an assistant and 3 teachers voted for the assistant and the assistant isn't good, the 3 teachers don't go in the teacher's lounge and go, stop complaining, it's my fault. It's my fault. I voted for him. It's my fault. It's my fault. They're not going to do that. So if they're not going to help me get someone better, there's no reason to have a more involved process. Instead, it's just how can I get the very best person? And their skills and abilities and how much they support teachers and that type of thing are going to determine whether they're effective, not who is on the committee.
Mm-hmm.
And we just get lost because that's the trend we see people doing.
Yeah.
We see average people do average things and we think average things are right. And that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like how you point out that, that's kind of, you get it set in that mindset, you get set in the, that's the way we've always done it, right? And it proves to be ineffective over time, whether it's a way of hiring people or a way of, dealing with discipline in a school or, how administrators talk to their teachers.
And so you want to hire talent. If you hire talent, it works out. If you don't hire talent, it doesn't work out. And that's really what you want.
Yeah. I want to refer to page 83 in School Culture Recharged. You talk about the 6 types of school culture: toxic, fragmented, balkanized, contrived, comfortable, and collaborative. Please talk to me about how PD plays a role in these types of school cultures, and especially today, as we enter the 2021 school year, how it is important to embed ongoing PD into school culture to have that comfortable and collaborative school culture that we want to strive for.
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing because I think there's so many different things in all this in terms of professional development. Yeah. But one of the things to understand, and this is for leadership, is leadership isn't an event. Mm-hmm. And professional development isn't ongoing. Mm-hmm. There's so much information on, and I hate to say this because almost every district in the country uses it, on teacher evaluation, and almost everything people do is just wrong. It's just incorrect. They don't understand high achievers. And think of it this way. The minimum goal of every single meeting I have, a faculty meeting, professional development opportunity, everything, be it department, small group level, anything, I want the minimum goal is I want teachers to be more excited about teaching tomorrow than they were today. Mm-hmm. Okay, minimum goal. Why do I suck the life out of people? Our jobs are hard. They're really hard. But what's interesting is people think that the way to get people more excited is show them a YouTube clip. Mm-hmm. And I like YouTube clips. I mean, I do. I mean, that's funny. Or they think it's giving them cupcakes. And I love frosting. I'll lick frosting off a dozen cupcakes and throw the rest away. And I got a sugar high like nothing you've ever seen. But you know what makes people excited? If you give them something that's make them more effective in their classroom. Yeah. That's professional development. And that's ongoing. The other thing is the buzz from the YouTube clip goes away. And so that's what you have to do. And that's that like the book 10-Minute In-Service. And you notice all the books that are any good, somebody else co-authored with me because I always work with people smarter than me that actually have noun-verb agreement. One of the things I do is like a book called 10-Minute In-Service with Annette Bro. What it does is I wanted to call it 5-Minute In-Service, but I was afraid people wouldn't believe it. And it's just a way to embed things in everything you do. Mm-hmm. Every time I'm interacting, I'm teaching. Think about it this way. One of the things I'm writing in How to Get All Teachers to Be Like the Best Teachers is teach, don't tell. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, we do so much telling in education, it's unbelievable. How many of y'all been told to raise your test scores? Everybody has. Well, how many of you have been keeping a little slack on the line on that? How many have been holding back on those test scores? Instead, you have them as high as you know how to get them. And what happens is people tell you to raise their test scores because they don't know how to teach you. Because if they could teach you, they'd teach you. Mm-hmm. If your central office could teach you how to raise your test scores, they would do it in a second. If your State Department could teach you how to raise your test scores, they'd do it in a second because it makes them look good also. Yeah. But what happens is we tell people and we don't teach people. I want to give you a quick example here, Dana. Let's say you're a teacher and I'm the principal, okay? Our instructional coach, anything. There's no position power in anything I do. There's never position power. I do this with people I supervise and I do this with people who supervise me. What we typically say, if I have a teacher I'd like to do something, I say this. Do you know something you might try? Dana, when I say, do you know something you might try? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm saying, do you know something you were too stupid to think of yourself? Do you know something that you should do because I'm better than you, smarter than you, get paid more than you? Do you know how you influence people? You know what you say to them? Do you know something I saw somebody do the other day? You all are amazing. Where do you come up with this stuff? Mm-hmm. You know what I saw a teacher do? This is incredible. I'd never think of that. I had a teacher tell me that one of the things they do you see, Dana, now we're learning together. Yeah. And there's no threat. There's no intimidation there. Maybe I'm even dumber than you because you already knew this. But one way or the other, you're so much more willing to accept it. Mm-hmm. And instead, what happens is we try to lead from above people. That's become like the bio in my introduction. What difference does that make?
Mm-hmm.
If I can help you, you think I'm good. If I can't help you, you don't think I'm any good. And it doesn't matter what's in my bio. And so as a principal, I don't need you to think I'm smart. I need you to get better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really see how that wording changes to become more of a collaborative conversation, right? And it's very likely that I would have seen that already. I would have seen that video, or I would have seen that teacher teach, right? Or I would have read that article, and that way you're bringing that person, into a working relationship to work together towards a common goal, rather than,
Right. And that's really the reason I write books, is so you have word for word specific language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing to keep in mind, normal things work with normal people.
Yeah.
But the people that we struggle the most with, normal things don't work with. So quit trying the normal things.
Mm-hmm.
You got to come up with something different. My first book was dealing with difficult teachers, because that's the single hardest thing to do as a leader or as a peer. They suck the life out of a school. And my third book was dealing with difficult parents, because I had 3 schools I was principal. All 3 schools, teachers didn't know what to say when they called parents. And I don't want you calling parents if you don't know what to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if it goes wrong, you lose confidence. And that doesn't help you as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of culture and establishing and building those things. And it doesn't have to come from me, but initially some pieces of it do have to come from me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, I think, to develop this culture, we think about bullies. And if you have a bully teacher, it's so funny. So many principals tell the other teachers to stand up to a bully teacher. I don't. I say, that's not your job. That's my job. Your job is to do what's right, even when they do wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough enough job. Do you expect your children to fix their friends?
Mm-hmm.
No, you expect your children to do what's right, even when their friends do wrong. And that's a tough enough job. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, understand, if I don't stand up to people who are negative or the bully people, what happens is they start to become very powerful in our school. Mm-hmm. And the teachers become afraid of them because they see that I'm afraid of them. Mm-hmm. And I don't expect the teachers I don't expect parents to ever talk to my teachers in a negative fashion. And I teach my parents this. And I also then work with them when I have people that try to do that. So they'll never do it again in my school. Mm-hmm. I don't want to resolve a situation. I want to fix a problem forever. And that's a very different goal.
Yeah, no, that's totally what I think most leaders need to do in situations where they're dealing with a toxic environment, or, a bully teacher, those type of things. And that kind of leads into my next question. I'm looking at page 143 in the book, and this is an experience I went through about where in a school there were classrooms where escalating student misbehavior led to a great deal of administrative reacting required, and teachers did not feel valued on a regular basis. There was an overabundance of low-skilled substitute teachers that had to corral a lot of the students when teachers needed those mental health days, right? And the prevalent feeling in this type of situation is to let the culture of the school manage the behaviors of the students. And instead, what your book points out is that to have positive school culture, to change school culture, is to have culture builders where the culture is in charge, because a negative and a toxic culture can be in charge in this example. But when we have culture builders, we can change that school culture, and we can have that thriving school culture. So what exactly do culture builders do?
Well, a couple of things. One, I didn't know any of my books had 143 pages. So that in of itself is quite stunning. You must have been, that's got to be close to the back cover, let me tell you.
Yeah.
most of them take about one average restroom visit to finish, let me tell you. So keep that in mind. Culture builders, I think what you're doing as a leader is you're providing knowledge of what really matters as important in your school. Mm-hmm. And you're reinforcing that. Think about how, this will sound like a silly thing. My last school had 1,350 middle school kids. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I had to teach my assistant principals is when a student gets sent to the office, that's the least important student in the school. Mm-hmm. Quit making them out to be the most important student in the mm-hmm. school. And we have a choice. I can spend time with the 1,349 not sitting down in the office, or I can spend time with the one sitting down in the office. Mm-hmm. And nobody supports teachers more than I do. Because if you don't do that, you can't ever build a culture. You can never build trust. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. But you know what I've learned? You know why I'm not in a hurry to deal with that kid? Because there's not a teacher in the school in a hurry to get the kid back. Mm-hmm. And if your secretary is any good, they can deal with 3 dysfunctional kids better than 3 dysfunctional teachers can deal with 3 dysfunctional kids. So it's taking advantage and reinforcing the people doing right instead of doing wrong. You know, one of my biggest mantras that I see people repeat all the time is make every decision based on your best people and you never make a wrong decision.
Mm-hmm.
But here's an example of the concept of a culture builder. If you change today, you change the climate.
Mm-hmm.
But if you never change back, you change the culture.
Mm.
Could I have gotten Curtis Peglow to change by doing that one day when I gave him the seating chart? No, I had to do it every day. I had to keep that drum beat going. You know, a lot of teachers greet the kids the first day of school when they're happy and perky. Not so many greet the kids in the middle of November. Yeah. Then it gets a little tired at the start of January, and then we're whipped in February. But you know what? If you want to take the word culture in almost anything you talk about and substitute the word leader, it probably is a better fit. Mm-hmm. We don't have dysfunctional cultures. We have dysfunctional leaders. Now, you may inherit a dysfunctional culture, but you inherited a culture from a dysfunctional leader. Yeah. And my question is, what are you going to do about it now? And think about this. If we start treating kids with respect and dignity today in every class, I guarantee you we've altered the climate. Mm-hmm. But if we never stop, we've altered the culture. Mm-hmm. The pandemic, it's really a strange thing, and I don't know where we're at in it because I'm recording this in early September, which is fine. The pandemic is an opportunity to change things. It is really a leverage point in a school. Think about this. If you have a faculty meeting where there are a group of negative people that sit together in the back near the door, do you realize the pandemic is an opportunity to rearrange your faculty meeting? Mm-hmm. It's to rearrange the seating chart. It's to rearrange that. And you can use that as an excuse, or you can just rearrange it. It doesn't make any difference. You don't need a pandemic. If this one's over and you're waiting for the next one, it may be a while. But the start of the school year is another opportunity. Building trust. I always say, reinforce effort, don't just reinforce results. Mm-hmm. My first basketball team was not very good. We were small, but we were slow. Mm-hmm. And if all I did was reinforce results, I didn't have many games to reinforce it. Mm-hmm. But if I could reinforce effort on this play, on this moment, at this time, during this minute, during this, now I could actually build something. Mm-hmm. And that's part of that building that culture.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so inspiring to hear about, it's that effort, it's that continuous support, whether you're working with a student like Curtis or you're working with teachers, it keeps that ongoing. And I resonate how you talk about, that greeting of the students, right? There's a lot of teachers that go through that period of time where they're kind of in the doldrums in November, right? And they don't put the effort forth that they did at the beginning of the school year. And so when we're putting together, the effort, when we're showing that we care, both as leaders and as teachers, that's the way to keep that positive school culture going.
And the reason I talk about things like greeting kids, Dana, all that is effort. That's not skill or ability. Yeah. And every day we have to determine who's on the side of the kids and who isn't. We have to determine that every day because the kids see it every day. Who's on the side of the kids and who isn't. And I don't like to talk about things that take too much skill and ability because it eliminates too many people. But when we talk about things that take effort, it's the people themselves that eliminate themselves. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's the other reason, one of the things I've gotten into a lot lately, because my girls are both teachers and we've written a couple books together, is student management. And it really sounds funny because people think that's old school, but people who are actually in the trenches know it's never old school. Mm-hmm. But think about this, Dana, what % of teachers do you think would like their job better if they were better at managing their classroom?
Pretty much everybody.
100%, because it benefits them. Classroom management is selfish. Mm-hmm. If any of us could get the students to behave better, we'd get the students to behave better, just like your own children. If anyone could get their own children to behave better, you'd get your children to behave better because it benefits you. Mm-hmm. But what I really think is important is what % of teachers would significantly like their job better? It's probably 60%. Mm-hmm. And just think about this. If every teacher could become extremely talented at classroom management, would that do anything with test scores? And it would make their job satisfaction better. It would make everybody's life better. They would enjoy going to work more. So the core things that we think are old school, what it really is we haven't solved them for everybody yet. Mm-hmm. And in every school, you have a couple teachers that have figured out classroom management. Mm-hmm. But here's the challenge, and this is the role of the leader that's so critical. I believe teachers should go in each other's classrooms because then the knowledge of one becomes the knowledge of all, just like if you get on Twitter or use social media or Pinterest or whatever. But what's interesting about classroom management, if I talk about superstars, backbones, and mediocres, what's interesting about classroom management, if you're going to observe the best teacher in a school on classroom management, you better go in the first 2 or 3 days. Because after that, you don't get to see it. It's all embedded. If you go in an average teacher school, average teacher's classroom, any day during the school year, you see classroom management every single day. Because it's never been embedded yet. They haven't understood how to do that. They haven't understood how to infuse that into what they do, into the culture of their classroom. And an ineffective teacher, you don't have to go in their classroom, you just stand in the hall and you hear classroom management. But the kids would be better off, the parents would have better relations, and the teachers would like their job better and be more effective if you teach everyone how to manage the students better. And manage, you can think whatever you want about that word. I don't care if you don't like it or not. Everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. And the best people, it's so embedded in what they do, it becomes a non-issue in their teaching. And we've got to do that. And that's part of building that culture, is building the ability to manage kids and how to work with them and how to get them more engaged and how to improve behavior of students. And it increases learning for everybody, not just the one. I thought when Curtis stopped going to sleep, I thought that probably got some of the other kids in the class attention also. Because now they were at risk of being the least respectful kid. And when Curtis was sleeping, they're never at the risk of being the least respectful kid. They are always number 2. But now he's paying attention. Dang it, it's pressure on everybody. And I didn't do it at the expense of any of the good kids.
Yeah, no, I really like how you kind of tie that in with the classroom management, right? Because observing teachers, you see that, right? You see how for some teachers it's seamless. You don't notice because they built that. They have that mutual respect with the students. But then, as you say, there's others where you hear the classroom management going on in the hallway because a lot of the time their teacher is yelling or raising their voice at the student.
But think about proximity. That's one of the reasons so many effective teachers walk around all the time, because proximity is embedded. I don't go to Dana when she's misbehaving. Coincidentally, I happen to be next to Dana when she was thinking about misbehaving. And in an average teacher's classroom that's stationary, if they get up and move, it becomes a distraction for the whole class because they're wondering, oh, and it becomes an event instead of it being embedded. And that's an example. And that's the same thing with leadership. I don't compliment teachers one day a year. I praise them, value them, stroke them, teach them that's how come I have the Friday Focus, and you've read Motivate and Inspire and Teach, single best leadership tool I've ever used. It's my belief system in front of my teachers on a regular basis, because in the teacher's lounge, teachers are sharing their belief system in front of their teachers on a regular basis. And if they don't hear mine, they start to believe theirs.
Well, it's been so inspiring talking to you today and hearing your thoughts on various issues to deal with teachers, classroom management, school culture, etc. Out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
That probably your podcasts are really good. One thing I want to mention to the listeners, we've had a 9-hour interview and I told her to get rid of everything that isn't any good. So we'll see how long it actually ends up being. Probably that it really is up to you. And I know that was just subtly mentioned, but it really is up to you. If you're having trouble getting motivated going to work, if you're having trouble getting students to do what you'd like, if you have trouble getting along with parents, run in the bathroom and look in the mirror. It never stops there, but it starts there. And then the other thing I think is being willing to be vulnerable, to ask for help. What can I do? And it's so interesting. I want to tell you a quick story. I don't know if this will make any sense. We think about leaders and knowledge, and we think about the need for technology. And when we went, a lot of schools went in March suddenly to distance education. And what made it so hard is, I always say, we didn't have a dress rehearsal. We just went to opening night. But I want you to think about the difference people make. Any teacher, any principal, anyone listening to this, how many of you, when you knew you were going virtual overnight, could name 3 teachers in your school you knew were going to figure this out? And how many of you could name 3 teachers you knew were never going to figure this out? And that wasn't because of their knowledge of technology. It was because of their care, their concern, their willingness to learn. And maybe they had to contact a couple people on, how do I do this? What does this mean? We're using Slack. I don't even know what that is. What's Zoom? How do I do this? What do you mean? Who do I make the chat leader? It's all of, but they were going to figure it out. And the thing, the 3 people that couldn't figure it out distance, when you get back in real person, they still haven't figured that out either. So it is up to us. It is in us. We have that opportunity. and everybody wants to be great. That's why you got an education. You want to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody does. And so I appreciate the audience. I appreciate what they do. And I'd love to connect with any of them. If anybody ever wants to just visit or has thoughts or things I can do to improve myself, be great.
Well, in that vein, where can people reach you online?
My Twitter handle's at Todd Whitaker, TODDWHITAKER, no spaces or anything, at Todd Whitaker. And my website's www.toddwhitaker.com, and I don't have any people. So my email and contact information is all there. And I tell people this all the time. Anytime you want to visit, I am nobody, but call or email me anytime, because I don't want you doing something wrong. It sounds really weird. It's like contacting parents. I never want my teachers doing it wrong because they're going to lose confidence. Mm-hmm. And the same way, if I don't want you to deal with a negative student and continue to struggle with that because you start to lose confidence. Mm-hmm. And I don't want that. And I'm nobody, but if I can ever help you, just want to visit, call me or email me anytime you want to, or connect on Twitter at Todd Whitaker. It's a treat for me. I'm very blessed to have the opportunity, what I do. Very, very lucky.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
It's a treat for me. I'm honored, Dana. Thanks for what you do.